presentation. The presentation will now officially start. Thank you for attending the Marmore webinar series. My name is Sudhakaran Jampala and I am Senior Policy Analyst with Marmore. And Marmore is a 100% owned research subsidiary of Marcus, investment asset management company based out of Kuwait with about $4 billion in assets under management. We recently celebrated the 40th anniversary of Marcus. And Marcus has multiple interests across oil and gas, real estate, financial restructuring, etc. In terms of Marmore is a specialized research firm offering researchers in areas such as sector research, company research, corporate profiling, and policy research. This presentation flows out of our work from the policy research front. Before proceeding on to the presentation, I would like to give you a brief introduction to the topic and why this topic was conceived in the first place. The topic for today is 5 GCC reforms that have changed the landscape, and it has been conceived due to the fact that we receive a lot of interest from external investors, foreign institutional bodies, and even governments in terms of their interest in developing an economic relationship with countries in the GCC, and also trying to find out whether there are opportunities for investment, including opportunities to gain investment from GCC countries. The GCC being one of those very few bright economic spots given an otherwise dismal economic climate in terms of uncertainties and recovery, both in Europe and US, has been receiving considerable attention with high government spending and so on, and it's one of the highest per capita income areas in the world. However, there have been some recent trends that point to the fact that if people come with a very flawed sort of perspective to investment in GCC, then it could end up being a strategic mistake. So that's the brief background behind why this series has been convened. And with that, we go on to the agenda slide. The main agenda today would be that we will be covering around 5 reforms from the GCC region, from countries such as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, specifically Abu Dhabi, and Kuwait. And we'll be covering topics ranging from workforce national programs to opening of the stock market, and including subsidy cuts and investment promotion agencies. As I told you before, these reforms have been selected due to the fact that they are very useful in terms of giving us a contextual understanding as to the wider economic trends and the thinking that is driving a lot of decision from policymakers in the region. Also, we would like to check whether the reforms that have been conducted, though they might look very disparate, very disconnected, they seem to come from a same or a similar mosaic of thought, and it will be useful to understand that so that policies to invest or to seek investments can be based on a much more clear understanding. The first country for consideration is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and we have 2 reforms from that country to consider. The first being the Nitakat program. The Nitakat program is basically a workforce nationalization program, and it's for creating employment opportunities for people in the country and to bolster the efforts towards a knowledge economy and economic diversification. The program sort of classifies companies into 4 bands, and if you fall under the green and the platinum band, you would be eligible for much more benefits from the government, including the ability to renew visas for your foreign workers and the ability to gain employees from companies that don't fall under the green or the platinum bands. Meanwhile, companies that fall under the red and the yellow bands could find themselves under difficulties in terms of being able to renew the visas for their workers, and they may not be able to stop their employees from passing on to companies under the green and the platinum band. And this program provides us a lesson in terms of the fact that a very quick reform program might end up creating difficulties for private companies. There have been complaints rising out of this program stating that it's very difficult to fill up posts, especially highly qualified ones. Though there are some voices claiming that it is the right way to go in spite of pain in the short term. The second reform that we are considering from Saudi Arabia is the opening of the Saudi Stock Exchange, which happened on June 15, 2015. From this reform, we see that though there is a commitment towards opening up the market for wider foreign investors, still there is a very measured and a very cautious approach being followed. This is due to the fact that this program is not open to small investors. The foreign investors who have assets under management of at least 5 billion US dollars are the only ones eligible. And in order to in order to be no single company or no single foreign company can own more than 10% of a Saudi firm, and a group of foreign investors put together cannot own more than 49% of any Saudi company. There is some speculation that this entire opening up of the Saudi Stock Exchange could push Saudi Arabia towards an MSCI emerging market status, but that's something that we got to wait and watch. And given the fact that there's still muted response from many parts of the world to the opening up of the Saudi Stock Exchange. The third reform that we are considering is the one from Abu Dhabi, the UAE, wherein there has been a rollback in subsidies. Usually the GCC countries are known for large subsidy programs, but given the fact that the governments are able to have large financial reserves. However, the recent evidence suggests that there could be a concerted effort towards building up momentum towards very strategic programs such as subsidy cuts, which could lead to larger programs such as a VAT and even introduction for taxes for both corporate and foreign companies. This slide shows you that the hike could range anywhere between 6% to 350%, and it's split by nationals, by expatriates, by government properties, and various other establishments. So it's not a blanket rollout of subsidy cut, but it's a very intelligent, phased, and a very segmented approach towards cutting down subsidies. Coming to the last country this in the series, we take up two reforms from Kuwait, one being the new FDI law and the other being the companies law. The new FDI law, which was introduced in 2013, is all about promoting more investments or to attract more investments into Kuwait. There are a lot of new amendments to this law in terms of the fact that it does away with local partnership. There's a single point of contact, and also introduce a novel concept called the negative risk. Novel in the case of Kuwait, it has been introduced in various parts of the world, but in the case of Kuwait, it's pretty novel, which tells investors exactly where their investments cannot go into. So there's very little confusion. There have been some recent developments with respect to the Kuwait Development Investment Promotion Authority, wherein there have been a lot of visits conducted abroad. For example, the KDPA chief visited Japan recently, March 2015, trying to seek out best practices from that country, and in terms of convincing investors in Japan to invest in Kuwait. So a similar sort of rollout across various parts of the world, including countries like South Korea and countries in Europe, is expected to happen in the near future. Very positive follow from this development has been the fact that in 2015, IBM opened its first branch office in Kuwait to use it as a beachhead or launch pad to do business with the wider Arab region, and in fact even in parts of Africa. Before the KDPA law was introduced in 2013, in 2012, the new companies law was introduced in order to ease the environment for doing business in Kuwait. Under this law, new provisions such as a one-person company and including professional partnerships have been allowed, which means that a lot of work around the knowledge economy can now start to happen in terms of technology transfer and bringing personnel with high level of expertise. So, taken together, all these laws are creating a situation where they're telling us that the governments in the region are very much focused on creating a pool for developing the knowledge economy. Though there are some positive developments, we also see that there are some deficiencies in terms of the fact that there has not been much effective follow-up after these laws have been released. And in certain cases, there has been some regulatory overreach in terms of not having very clear and distinct lines of authority. For example, in the case of the companies law in Kuwait, whereas the Ministry of Commerce and Industry holds the Article 172, which tells that the people can sell off their shares within 12 months after the balance sheet of a company has been produced. The CMA, the Capital Market Authority, holds ultra wire on that in terms of having the ability to take a case-by-case approach and prohibit, if necessary, any sale of such shares. What are the conclusions from these reforms for foreign investors? One, it's very necessary to take a long-term approach or long-term or have a long-term vision and strategy in place in terms of coming to the GCC. Otherwise, you might find that it might prove difficult to either convince people to invest in your idea or to find the right ideas to invest. So a long-term vision is very much important. The second point is that most of the GCC countries are not only interested in using their massive financial reserves and their sovereign wealth funds to invest abroad, but now they are more and more asking the question as to how they can benefit from investments into their country. So when there's an idea for investment, or when a GCC country is being approached, it's very important to think from the angle of what's in it for the country that you're interested in. The third point being that it's very vital to practice strategic patience because of the fact that a lot of these reforms are still in the experimental phase, and the wait and watch approach is being adopted. So it could be a case of two steps forward and one step back. So there might be certain confusing signals coming out. For investors who maintain strategic patience, it could prove very beneficial in terms of being able to latch on to the fruits that might come out later. So with that, our very short presentation comes to a close. Thank you for attending this presentation. In case you have any questions, please do post them on the Q&A section towards the right of your screen. If I'm not able to get back to your question within this presentation, you can drop your question at my email address, which is at the top of the presentation, and I will get back to you at the earliest. And also, I would like to remind you that an entire recording of this presentation will be made available to you, along with the slides that have been used in this presentation. We have a question from a participant asking whether the Dakat program in Saudi Arabia has been a success or a failure. So given the fact that the Intakat was introduced in 2011 and it's been 4 years down the line, there have been voices coming out that the program has created a very difficult environment for private businesses. And also the latest edition of the program has been postponed for a few more months. So that tells us that there is a feeling that this program was essentially not very successful in achieving its objectives. One reason could be that it was pushed very, very quick, and taking a much more long-term approach would have been useful in this case. We have another question, and this is talking about the fact that Kuwait recently lost its subsidy cuts, and again it was forced to it was forced to roll back. I mean, to give you some background, Kuwait on January 1st, 2015, introduced subsidies on diesel and kerosene, but then it had to roll back by the end of the month due to the fact that it was starting to cause inflation in the country. Uh, and the questioner wants to know how that approach contrasts with the UAE. In the case of the UAE, we noticed that there was a long-term strategic communications approach adopted. The entire program was advertised in all popular media, on all government websites, right from around the early to 2014. So they sort of build up momentum going into the program. Also, the fact that they were very clear as to what segments they were targeting. For instance, government institutions have to pay a very high fee on their utilities, whereas private homes come on a lower scale. And similarly, Emirati nationals are on a lower scale, whereas expats would have to pay higher. So we see a multi-pronged approach in terms of clearly segmenting and rolling it out on a very intelligent basis. So in that sense, probably Kuwait could learn from UAE in terms of adopting a strategic communications program and a phase intelligent rollout program. And the third question is also with respect to Kuwait, and the individual wants to know what bottlenecks are there to the implementation of the Kuwait development program, and and given the fact that many projects have been stalling, and the person also would like to know whether the reforms enacted would be sufficient to execute the next 5-year plan successfully. Uh, a, a lot of the inertia comes due to the fact that in the case of Kuwait, the country depends on oil revenues for more than 90% of revenues, and this has sort of created a lag for other parts of the other parts of the economy to come up to speed. So, given that these reforms are starting to flow in now, we expect the momentum to build up over the next decade. Expecting miracles within a short span of time would not be a very sensible approach in our opinion. And it's given the fact that these reforms have just been introduced, we would have to take in the initial results into a survey and then probably form a more intelligent opinion after that. We have one more question regarding Kuwait, and this is about the Kuwait Investment Authority, and the person would like to know how that can help in improving the doing business rankings. Definitely, definitely there is a lot of consternation among policymakers in Kuwait due to the fact that Kuwait ranks pretty poorly along various parameters in terms of the ease of doing business. So the new investment promotion authority would be forced to take note of best practice from across the world, and if there is and if there is a very urgent need to call in investments from abroad, then they would have to sort of convince people from overseas with respect to the program. So that in itself will create the compulsion, the constraint to stop and listen as to what needs to be set right. For example, the infrastructure, the number of procedures, the number of licensing requirements from government bodies, all these sort of bureaucratic elements are already being questioned by foreign investors. So in that sense, the KDPA program would lay out the scene open for query policymakers to be more open to suggestions from abroad and to feedback from abroad, and that in itself would create the momentum for change. Uh, if there are any more questions, the presentation will remain open for the next 5 minutes. However, if there are no more questions, then probably it will be closed for the next 2 minutes. So I'll be waiting for your questions. So in case there's any last round of questions, please do shoot them now. I guess there are no more questions in queue. So thank you very much for your presence and your attendance. And we look forward to seeing you in many more such webinar series. In case you have any feedback, kindly do email your suggestions, your feedback to my email address, and it will be promptly attended to. Thank you very much, and I wish you a good day ahead.